everybody. Welcome to Teal's Roadhouse. So good to have y'all with us. Derek Wells is in the house.
Come on, man.
Legendary session player, guitar player, producer, man. Tons of #1 records over the years. I've been so excited about sitting down with you. You and I have never had a chance to work together, so I'm looking forward to talking production philosophy and guitar tones and
same to you,
just
brother.
all this crazy stuff in this business, man. Honored to have you.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Man. Honor's mine, truly.
So you're a native Nashvilleian.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it really is. I haven't known a whole lot of them over the years. Darren Favorite. I don't know if you know Darren.
Yeah,
Darren played guitar with me for a long time.
Yep.
Darren's a native Nashvilleian. Flip Anderson played piano for me for a long time. He's retired up in Sevierville these days, but he was a native Nashvilleian.
Yep.
There's not a lot of them around that get it that wind up in the music business.
Well, you know, mine's a funny asterisk. I was born in Nashville, Arkansas.
No kidding.
But my parents moved to Nashville, Tennessee when I was about 10 months old.
Kent Wells is from Nashville, Arkansas, too. And I grew up in Southwest Arkansas.
Kent is my daddy.
Wow. I didn't put that together.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the thing. So Kent and my mama, Marcia, packed me up as a little the infant, 10 months old, and moved to Nashville to kind of chase their dream.
Yeah.
Playing music. And my dad's a guitar player, for anybody that doesn't know, and my mom's been a session singer and traveled, so like they still are in the dad's been with Dolly now for since '86.
Oh yeah,
kind of off and on.
He's done a lot of session work too.
He's done a lot of stuff, a lot of records, and then my mom is always, she was with Patty Loveless for a long time singing, and she's been out with Christopher Cross for like, gosh, probably 11 or 12 years now.
No kidding.
Kind of just still doing that gig. So yeah, musical family came by it on us.
Yeah. Did you study under your dad, or did you really study under other people when you were growing up, or just kind of just picked it up as you went along?
Yeah, mostly the third. I came around to it the long way, because when I was a kid, I didn't really care much about it. I was kind of a sports kid, and I also think, I've said this to people before. I meet a lot of people in our business that are like, well, my daddy couldn't carry a tune, but he listened to great music, and we always listened to Waylon Jennings records or the Beatles or stuff in my house. Man, well, my parents it was a job.
Yeah.
Like, they were listening to music for work, and I definitely got some great music through that, but there wasn't a whole lot of like recreational listening in my house as a kid. It was like they were working on music for gigs. They were hustling.
So y'all weren't hanging out at Christmas time banging on the piano and singing gospel songs.
No, they were off the clock, bro. You know what I mean?
I completely understand that.
Yeah. And so the hooks didn't get in me until way later in life. And there were always instruments around, and occasionally I'd get bored and go in my dad's room and bang around on a guitar or something, but I didn't really want to have much to do with it. And then even as a kid too, because they both toured so much, I think just snotty little kid, I had a sour taste in my mouth a little bit from just how much they were gone.
I can see that.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And when you're a kid, you brush by all the cool experiences. You brush by all the travel that I got to do as a kid or whatever. But well, Dad wasn't here for my birthday, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, luckily in my kind of late teens, I was probably 16, 17, the bug just kind of caught me.
Yeah.
It just kind of jumped out and grabbed me. And even then I was hesitant, but after I went to college at Western Kentucky and was kind of a
topper.
Yeah, we hit topper. Well, for 3 glorious semesters. and I basically, withdrew before I flunked out. And that's when I was like, hey, I think I'm going to just try to play guitar. I kind of got the bug. I'm serious about it. I think I'm going to jump in. My parents were like, this is a terrible idea. You're getting too late to start. Don't do this. And I think in hindsight, they just thought, well, 2 things. One, I think they knew how hard it was.
Yeah.
They know how hard this business is, and no matter how good you are, it's still a crapshoot. And I think furthermore, they were concerned that like, well, Derek's kind of struggling in college, and like he's lost his way, and he thinks this might be easy. And it was actually the opposite. Like growing up here, you talk about a guy like Darren Favorite. Like I knew Darren Favorite since I was a kid. Like, I knew how good you had to be to play guitar in this town.
Oh yeah. And
I knew I wasn't there yet, but I felt like I could be. And so, that was really the start of, I was about 19 then, and that was the changeover of just like, all right, I'm going to try my damnedest to get a job playing guitar, you know, and I was waiting tables at the Cooker in Green Hills. Remember that
No
place?
kidding. Oh, yeah.
I was waiting tables at the Cooker, and I was like, I didn't have a life or a girlfriend or friends or nothing. I would go and wait tables, and I saved my money, and I used every dollar I made to go buy gear, and I just lived in my dad's basement and learned records and played guitar like an animal for, you know,
I think there's
while.
something real true about what you said too, and I know it from the experience that I've had with my own children. My oldest daughter will be 24 the end of June, and she graduated from WKU.
Oh, cool.
Other one went for a year, and I don't think she went to class 5 times.
She was on my path.
And now
that was my curriculum.
And now she's at Blackbird studying audio engineering. She's been out on the road with me for a couple of years, and now she's just about to graduate in June with the first step of audio engineering. So,
Super cool.
But there was a bitterness that was attached to them because Daddy was gone so much, and there was all this dynamic, and just it gave them a struggle, and I can understand why you just kind of pushed all that aside. But and as they've gotten into their 20s, that perspective has changed a lot back toward me and toward my wife and our
100%.
marriage, and just the sacrifice that I had to make on the road and all that stuff too. It's an adjustment for a kid to go through.
Well, the kids live, you know, and I've got my own, you know, my daughter Charlotte's 5 and my son's 3, and it's like, you know, the kids can't help but live by comparison. And it probably would have been easier if I had a lot of other friends and stuff whose parents had similar kinds of lifestyles. But like you go to school and you're like, well, all my buddies' dads are at every football game.
Yeah.
What the fuck's going on here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you just, you know, that's the way your selfish, childish mind works. And then, it didn't take long, especially once I started having a little bit of my own career and out touring and stuff, like to completely 180 on that and be like, man, y'all were living your dreams and feeding me. You know, my dad's joke was like, he'd be like, you know, Derek's a little skinny, but I fed him for 18 years playing guitar, you know? And you see that on the other side and you're like, man, this was amazing.
Yeah, but from a parent's perspective, I had to realize this too, and I'm sure you've talked about this with your mom and dad. My dream wasn't their dream.
Fair.
And it takes a while for you to find that, because it's like you don't want to be competing with what your parents are doing. And you know, I had to realize that all the stuff that I thought was really cool, they could give a crap less about, especially when they were young. All they know is Daddy was gone.
1,000%.
Yeah.
I didn't care if Dad was on SNL. I was mad he missed my birthday party.
Oh yeah, I understand.
So
when you got in the basement and you started woodshedding, walk me through that song repertoire that you were going through, that early stuff that you were really honing your craft on.
Well, same thing. You know, I have to be really honest to everybody. I came to country music definitely the back way. You know, when I was a kid in, you know, high school in Nashville, if we were riding around in the car, you know, your buddies were riding around in the car, you know, we would listen to things like Charlie Daniels Band or something like that. But we were listening to a lot of rock and roll when I was a kid. And then there was some rap in there too that, you know, my age range, people were listening to that kind of stuff. And it wasn't really until I dug in as a guitar player and the musicianship of the country records is really kind of what brought me to that. So to answer your question, it was like, you know, when I was going to dig in, I was like, well, if I'm going to have a living in Nashville, I got to learn how to play country music.
Yeah.
I have to do it, you know? And so what I would do is I would go, you know, this was back when you'd go buy records at Walmart.
Yeah.
And I'd take my money and every, you know, back then I think records came out on Mondays, right? Now it's Music Friday, but back then, I think
charts came out on Monday. A lot of new stuff drops first of the week.
Yeah. So anyways, but I would go once a week, and I would go buy 2 albums. I would buy some sort of either like contemporary or classic country record, and then I'd buy some sort of rock or popular record. Like, you know, it'd be like I'd go buy this George Strait the Hits record and like an Incubus record. And I'd go home and I would just I'd spend a week like trying my best to like work on, like learn all the licks, whether it's, you know, Brent Mason or JT or whoever on these records. And then, you know, these guitar players in these bands. And my parents had told me, they were like, listen, if you're serious about this, you need to go buy this book called The Nashville Number System. You should really start. It's how we read music here in town. It's going to help you if you're serious. You know, I think they were still kind of kicking the tires on me, going, well, see if he means it. And so, you know, that was it. It was just like I would go buy these 2 records every week, and I would just try to learn. And I know at first I wasn't even close.
Yeah.
But like I said, man, it was just this period. I was just eat up with it, man. I just didn't care about anything else, you know. And it was a different time, man. We didn't have these. We didn't have.
Oh my gosh!
We didn't have
Nowadays,
this. I didn't. There wasn't YouTube. I couldn't sit around and like, you know.
you couldn't pull up tracks and actually pull the guitar part out and work on solos and
Well,
different things.
yeah, but I also just didn't have anything to just fart around and waste time. It was like, you know, I'd night owl and stay up all night. You know, I'd go wait tables and I'd stay up all night, and there was nothing else to do but sit there and play guitar. And man, you know, just sounding it out and working. And yeah, and then it was like, as I started digesting the musicianship and the guitar playing in these records, that made me want to listen more. And then all of a sudden the songs start coming to you, and you start realizing, like, you know, you remember like it really clicking with me the first, like Silver Wings, like the first time, like really that the words, like I allowed myself to digest the song instead of just learning the guitar parts or whatever. And you're like, oh man. And you know, now it's obviously like the biggest part of what I do in country music and traditional country music, but I definitely had to take the back way around.
It sure has changed a lot too. You know, you look at guys like Brent Rowan, Brent Mason, Bukovac, Greenberg, you know, and the country palette has gotten so diverse, man. It's just a wide open thing to play with now. With all these influences piled in on everybody, it's really an amazing time to be in the industry.
It's one of the most, I mean, it's so fun for me right now.
And there's so much creativity. I think song structures come back. I think we're at a place right now. I've noticed it kind of runs in 10-year increments as far as styles of music, and then people kind of get bored, and then production things will change a little bit. You know, we went through a bro country stage. It seems like traditionalism is coming back a little bit more now. There's some really great male-female singers. Zach Top's killing it out there right now.
Yeah.
But you still have that pop edge with Kelsey Ballerini and all this other stuff that's going on too, and the Maren Moore stuff, and you played on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I just, you know, I always said, like, man, there's really only two types of music: good music and bad music.
Yeah. And that's all a perspective in itself.
That's subjective too, right? And but yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, to your point, the 10-year thing, it does seem like every once in a while something comes along that feels a little bit in contrast to the majority of what's happening. You know, it stands itself out. I mean, certainly, you know, I was ground zero when Bro Country hit.
Yeah.
And it just sounded so different from everything else on the radio at the time that you couldn't help but pay attention. And, you know, love it or hate it, it made you pay attention. And I think, like, yeah, here we are now, and you hear Zach Top on the radio, and you know, love it or hate it, you know, you go, man, that's different. You know what I mean? And I think there's something for everybody, and that's what's so fun about it for me, is like, as a guy who came up listening to a lot of different music, and still, I mean, I love Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I love Ray Charles records, and I love heavy metal, and I'm like, so for me, I couldn't ask for a better time to be a musician or a creator in this town, because I feel like I get to scratch so many itches, you know, playing on these Hardy records and working on those, and I get to scratch all my old, like, early 2000s rock itches, and then, you know, you do some of the more, you know, contemporary, you know, or the more classic country stuff, you know, if it's a Midland record or whatever. It's like, I feel like I get to scratch every itch right now, so it's a blast.
As a player, I was watching an interview, and I've talked about this a couple of times with Bukovac a while back, and he was talking about just the challenge that when you start playing on records, one of the most difficult parts of it. You know, you say you've cut a great track, and you're sitting in the guitar player's seat, and it's time to run down your solos, and you play one, you think you just freaking crushed, and they're like, don't really care for that. Let's change direction. You got to wipe that clean, take a breath, back up, and in the next 30 seconds to 2 minutes in that little time where you got to come up with something that's just as good and just as passionate and just as intense. How do you get that mindset to get to that place as a player where you get your personal perspective out of it, and you just approaching the skill and trying to give the song and that producer the best that they can, whatever it is that they're wanting at the time?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, obviously I can only speak for myself, but that is, like, to me, the needle you're always trying to thread is, you know, first off, like, I care by nature. You know, I want to be proud of what I do, and I want to, you know, I want anyone that hires me or asks me to come make their music to feel like I'm showing up and they're getting my best. The flip side of that is you can't become so precious about all your ideas that you get, annoyed or thrown off when people go, I don't think that's really it so
Yeah.
much. And that's the thing, like that's the place, you know, you're trying, for me, it's like, I'm always trying to live in that place where like, I care tremendously and I want everyone to be happy here. But if I try something and you're like, that's not it, well, I'm definitely not gonna get my feelings hurt, you know? And in terms of being able to, you know, actually perform that thing, I mean, dude, I really think it's just it's a muscle like anything else. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, you know, it's like running a marathon or something. You know, you talk to somebody, it's like, man, how you run all those miles? And they're like, well, I run a lot of miles a lot. You know, even when I'm not in training, I run 12 miles a day or, you know, thing. And it's like that like spitting out solos or writing little hooks or all that stuff, even the tones, like to me, that's all just muscles you work. It's just staying in shape.
But for me, I'll give you a comparison. I remember when I first got to town and I really thought, man, I had a sack full of songs. I was great. The hardest thing to adjust to as a songwriter is getting your song shot down, especially when you write from a personal place. Yeah. When you put that much time and effort into it and then somebody says, I don't care for that. It hurts your feelings a little bit. Getting your emotions out of the way at this level probably is one of the first things you have to master.
100%.
Because I mean, if you don't, producers won't want to use you. If you bring that negativity into that session, you screw everything up.
Oh man!
And as a producer, if you move to that place, I'm sure you can identify it. If you try some new player and they come in with that bad vibe, they don't come back.
It takes a very small amount of poison to poison the well. I'll say that, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's and look, I didn't have that mastered at the beginning. Like there were lots of times exactly the thing you described, you know, when I was young, especially when I was starting on sessions, like playing a signature thing that I thought of or a solo or something and them going like, that's not it. And you're like, what do you mean?
Well, and you're already in your mind working up how you're going to double and triple it and working the harmonics out in your brain and everything. And then you got to just get the rug jerked out from under you.
Well, and I also say the other thing I had to really learn is I had to learn that, you know, it's fair if you're, you know, that producer or that artist or that songwriter, whoever you're working with or for, if they're like, that's not it, and also I don't know what it is, but I know that's not it, that's fair.
Yeah.
And when I was young, it frustrated me. I'm like, well, if that's not it, well, tell me what you want me to play. I'll play whatever you want me to play. And it took me some years, and I think really what it is just like building up your own kind of secure, like the assurance, you know, once I had played on a few big records, you get a couple hits under your belt, that stuff starts to roll off your back a lot easier than when you like feel like you're trying to prove yourself. Yeah. You know, and you're in there and you just kind of like want to show everybody that you're great or you can do this or that you're on the level, and someone shoots down your idea and you're like, what do you mean? You know, that stuff got so much easier to handle once you get a little success under your belt.
How much do you think commercial guitar tones have changed? Let's go back just from my experience, even if you go back to the Alabama days. But when I started making records, the first several I did was with Brent Rowan. Yep. And Brent had a real chorusy tone. And then I kind of moved into Brent Mason. Brent's a little bit tighter, a little drier. And, you know, it seems like we've moved into some more rock and roll tones. You've got some dirtier tones. Where do you see we're evolving to, and what's next?
Well, I think you said the word earlier, like it's cycles.
Yeah.
I think it's secular, you know, or circular, and it's like, you know, whether it's, you know, Zach Top, who we've already referenced, or a guy like Jake Worthington, who's another guy I love, or stuff, you know, it's like those like bone clean Telecaster tones are starting to come back into the fold and to be honest, that's across the board. Like I think it's like the tones of the drums, the tones of, you know, the way pedal steel's treated, all that kind of stuff now. But
without a doubt. Yeah.
But guitar specifically, you know, I think it's always that thing where like something comes along, it's used on a big hit, people chase that for a while, and then just when everyone's kind of like subconsciously getting tired of hearing it, somebody comes along with something else or goes back to the old, you know what, I've been using delay a lot, I'm going to turn it out. You know, that's a big one for me. I can say personally, just in the last like 6 years, the guitar tones have dried up a lot. You know, when I would say like back in the aughts, you know, the aughts 2000s and the early 2010s, there was a lot of real like atmospheric guitar, a lot of reverb, a lot of delay. Book was, you know, at the forefront of that, just these incredible guitar sound, like lush kind of things. And like, I can say like in the last 5-6 years, whether it's rock or country or the pop stuff, it's all been drying up. And I think that's, again, just, we're back to that. It's in contrast to what's happening, or, you know, some of this stuff gets time stamped, because there was a point when people would be like, you know, you'd turn on a chorus pedal and they'd be like, hey man, this ain't fucking Toto cover band. And, you know, and now people are starting to ask for it.
Yeah.
Like, man, wait, put a little bit of chorus on there. I'm making a Post Malone record right now. And he's you know, he thinks of those iconic, you know,
and
late
that's maybe
80s, early
the area
90s.
that influenced him. Yeah.
Hugely. And so you're like, oh yeah, well, I know how to do that too, you know, and you do that. So yeah, I think it just always turns and turns and turns and turns, you know.
That's the great thing about creativity. You talk about drum sounds. You know, Stroud, when I started working with James Stroud in the early 90s, and Julian. God love him. Done years and years of great work with Julian. Drum sounds were a big thing. Huge. You know, and Stroud came in and he had been sampling rooms and stuff with his snare sounds for years. And then you wake up, and I've done some sessions with Near Z.
Yeah.
And Near Z is like, he is so difficult to reproduce. I mean, that guy plays intricate rhythms inside what he's doing, that his groove is so wide that it sounds like he's playing to a loop. Yep. And you try to get your live drummer to reproduce that, and it's a really difficult thing to do. Yeah. So sounds and techniques evolve and change, and that's the great thing. You're always chasing that new thing that makes it interesting.
That's, man, for me, it's, you know, Russ Paul, the steel player, I know you know him, but if anyone doesn't know Russ Paul, he's the one that I remember you told me years ago, it's like, man, you're chasing the muse. Like, that's all the thing is, like, if I get to the point where, like, I can't find more stuff to inspire me, or I feel like I know everything there is to know about playing guitar or recording music, then I might as well just quit.
Yeah.
Because there ain't no point to it at that point. And it's like that's the funnest thing for me, is kind of collecting these little tricks and these things in your library, and then getting the opportunity to use it. Yeah. Being like, oh, I never thought like playing along to all these Michael Jackson records or these Earth, Wind & Fire records would help me in my country music session career, but I'll be damned.
Yeah.
Here I am being asked to do this or whatever today. And like, that's the stuff I live for.
You know, and I watch a lot of that stuff too. Steve, who's the guy who played on all that Michael Jackson stuff?
Lukather?
Steve Lukather's
From
a badass. Yeah, Steve's a badass. And you know, he talks about all that stuff. I mean, primarily it just did a lot of rhythm stuff, but that guy's a phenomenal player too.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, dude, Dan Huff. Same,
absolutely. I mean, what was your first big record that you played on? What was that first one?
Well, I had I have to think about it. I think, well, I remember the first time I heard myself on the radio was kind of a funny story, because Frank Rogers, who's been a great mentor to me and everything, he called me over he called me one day and he said, can you come do an overdub at my studio tonight? It's for Darius Rucker. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I get over there, and it was a situation where there was a song, the album was out, the song had already been released, and they wanted to make it a single, but the intro was like keyboards, and some of the radio folks had said it sounded a little too R&B. And so the label had said, hey, Frank, we need a single mix, and we need to replace the intro with, you know, guitars or something. And there was a solo that was like, I think it was Gordon Mote had played like a whirly solo or something. So so I went over to Frank's and played, you know, we added a bunch of guitars on the intro, and I had just started working with Frank on a Scotty McCreery record that he had hired me to play on that hadn't come out yet. Nobody'd heard, but I was working on it with Frank. So he had been using me a little bit. He asked me, and I remember it was like 2 weeks later, I heard it on the radio, because they were ready to ship it out. But I think that song died. I don't think it was like a hit or anything. And then the first big hit I played on was Maddie and Tay, was Girl in a Country Song.
No kidding.
That was my first #1 song. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. I love talking production technique and theory too. You know, I've often wondered, and every producer doesn't do this, but as I work on my own stuff, as I've produced my own music over the years, I try to make sure, you know, some of those early records, man, Stroud would go back. We'd have Paul Franklin in the studio, and he would play some steel stuff, and then he'd set his pedal bro up, and he'd play pedal bro, and they'd swap back and forth between steel and pedal bro. You know how hard that is to do live?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're adding things that are really difficult to reproduce, and as I've gotten more mature in the production side of it, I've learned to really try to eliminate some of that, so I make those transitions easier with my guys.
Sure.
And I've always wondered, as a top end producer, man, when you produce a baby act for the first time, are you cognizant of the fact that they're going to have not maybe the best players, that you have to simplify things a little bit and not get too advanced for the level that they're interested in the marketplace in, or does that even factor into what your thought process is?
I'd have to say no in regards to the reproduction of it. You know, I just think like, make the best record you can,
Yeah,
and then we'll figure it out live. You know, whether that means changing something or hiring another player or putting something on tracks, whatever.
Yeah.
If it has to become its own thing, there it comes its own thing. But like, make the record for the record. And I will say, what I have tried to be cognizant of on stuff that I've produced is, you know, not making a Derek Wells record that someone else sings on. You know, I was really lucky that before I got a chance to produce anything, I had worked with amazing producers playing guitar, you know, Scott Hendricks, Dan Huff, Julian, Frank Liddell, Frank Rogers, Tony Brown. I'd worked with, you know, got to play guitar for all these guys before anyone asked me, hey, would you want to produce something? And I feel like I was able to kind of cherry pick a lot of my favorite parts of those guys' processes. I mean, Joey Moy's another huge, I mean, obviously I work with Joey and he's been a huge influence too. But, you know, one thing that I, you know, kind of made it a point to do is try to just not use the same players and engineers on every record. There's a little bit of overlap, but you know, it was like, I remember when I first started working with Maddie and Tay as a producer, after Dan had been doing those records and I was just playing guitar and then moving on, I remember being like, okay, girls, well, here's your chance. Like, is there anything, you know, like there used to be a lot of fiddle on the Dan stuff. Like, is that something you're really passionate about? And they're like, actually, no, we never had a fiddle player in the band really anyway. And like, but we do love steel. And so right there you start going like, oh, okay. And it starts informing my decisions about how I would cast the band, and then talking about records they love and kind of doing that. And so for me, that's always been way more my process, is like, let's talk about music you love. Let's talk about instruments that you love. You know, let's talk about songs you love. And based on those influences, let me try to cast players that like do that stuff naturally. Because in Nashville, it's the best musicians on the planet, man. Anybody could probably play anything you tell them to. But I think the magic happens is when you get the guys there that you don't have to tell them.
Oh yeah, when it's just a stylistic fit.
That's just what they do.
I mean, but and think about the Steely Dan stuff. How many guitar players did they use?
Oh, dude, they would go through those.
They would go through them until they found what they wanted. I've heard. I mean, I'm fascinated by the different philosophies of all this, and I've heard all these stories that when Jimmy Bowen came to town, who was James Stroud's mentor.
That's right.
Jimmy Bowen came from that LA scene, and when he came in, he built a factory. He built a machine.
That's right.
He might have 5 sessions going on at the same time.
That's right.
Every engineer was on the exact same console. Yep. They had the same tape machine. All the stuff was good. And Jimmy Bowen would just bounce from studio to studio. Mm-hmm. He knew every player that was in there. He would come in and approve the edits and approve the vocals and do the things. That's but right. He had multiple things going on at one time. Mm-hmm. That mass production was fine for them. I don't think that applies nowadays. I don't think you could pull that off now. Music is too diverse.
Yeah, I don't.
But it was still great for its time and place. And I think James was a student of that. You know?
Well, I think the relationship, you know, between artists and, I mean, you got to think about it too. Like even at that time, like the idea to going in and making music in a studio for artists was still so foreign. And like, you know, plainly, like I don't think any of them would have ever thought to do it another way. I think everyone was like, well, this is Jimmy Bowen. He makes hit records. He knows how to do this. This is how it's done.
Yeah.
I think nowadays, man, the artists are too they're too smart, man. They'd be like, what do you mean you're not going to be in there while we're making my record?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't think it would fly now, you know?
And then and I'm fascinated by the rock and roll mentality too. I've got friends in the rock world, and I'll see them come into Ocean Way, and they'll rent the building for 4 months.
Totally.
And then they write everything there, and they just get into that zone, and they have the catering come in and do all that. I think our process in this town is a lot more efficient, where we do all the pre-production in advance, and you spend time writing, you get all your songs done, you map everything out, you kind of have an idea of what you're doing when you get in the studio. You know the players that you're going to have, and you're much more efficient with that studio clock. It just seems like when you go through that process, you got to sell so many freaking records just to break even.
Oh yeah,
it's unbelievable,
man.
the cost. I mean, you spend 3 or 4 months at Ocean Way, you spending some money, baby.
Oh man, yeah, those were multi-million-dollar records.
Yeah, it's just a different philosophy. But and at the other side of it, I wonder, how different would my own music be if I stepped into that scenario even for a month and tried to figure it out. And as you're creating dynamics and you're creating extended solos and you're layering things that are more orchestral. Yeah. In theory, than just you're just playing music off a chart. There's a whole different philosophy there.
Well, I will say it's like I do think that there's, on the onset, like I don't think there's a right or wrong way to music, right? And I know you feel the same way, but it's like what we have proven that we're capable of doing in Nashville, and like you said, in terms of the efficiency, is incredible. I think the challenge is like the efficiency is great as long as we don't let it become like clock in, clock out mentality. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing is like, because I think outsiders or maybe naysayers or people who've just never worked, in Nashville proper, they're like, what do you mean you go and you in a studio from, for 3 hours from 10 to 1 and you make music? That's not making music. And it's like, well, I would argue differently. As long as the right people are there and the mindset is there, I'm like, no, I can definitely point stuff that I am extremely proud of. Like I can point a brilliant song that I'm extremely proud of that I know like we all poured into, the fact that it happened. It's like, so what had happened in 3 hours? It's like an efficiency penalty. Like you got great people in there and there was a great song and an artist who knew what they wanted to say. Like it ain't supposed to be some ass whipping. Yeah. So like just because it didn't take us 3 days to figure that out doesn't mean we're penalized. The flip side is you have to check yourself. For me, it's like it can't just be another day for me. It can't just be clocking in 3 hours. Yeah, you're welcome for playing on your record. See ya. Like it can't be that way. And I think any of us would be lying if we didn't have days where that started to kind of creep. The last session on a Friday, full of sessions, and you're kind of like, one more till I go. That is also real. So I think that's everyone's own kind of personal, battle or walk or thing you got to be mindful of. Is just like, yeah, we can still do amazing shit in this super efficient way because we got the best musicians and engineers and songwriters and artists on the planet. But like not letting it become just like another day at the
creatively
office.
Spent. Your well can get dry, and that's songwriting, that's musicianship, everything. You can kind of get tapped out. Where have you gotten to the point where you say, I got to take a month off?
All the time, dude.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. JT was the guy that taught me that. He, JT Cornfloss, who's may he rest in peace. He was one of my like mentors, and he told me we were on a demo session one night at like Legends or something, and I had done like a week of triples, and just probably had circles around my eyes, and playing 15 songs a day, just plowing.
Yeah.
And he was like, I was like, well, man, I don't want to say no because I feel like people might not call me anymore, And he was like, man, if you just say you're busy, what are they going to say? Yeah. And he kind of told me, he was like, yeah, a couple times a year, I just pick a month and I don't tell anybody. But when people call me for sessions that month, I just go, hey, man, sorry, I wish I could. I'm busy. And I started kind of doing that, man, and it changed my whole life.
You got to take that time. You got to back off.
I bet that keeps you fresh too. And coming in with some fresher ideas that you wouldn't.
You have to, man.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you let the town wait to give you a break, they ain't gonna do that.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Always
because
gonna be something.
there's so many artists and there's so many cutting. It's constant. It's all the time.
Watching this thing, it was Bruce Hornsby. There's a YouTube video, and he was saying how he didn't really enjoy playing on people's records as much because they were always asking him to play like he played on his stuff. And he's always trying to get into something new, and they're asking for the old. So how do you keep from getting typecast as, oh, he always plays like that? I mean, you have to take a break every now and then, listen to new stuff. And...
Yeah, I mean, I think just staying cognizant of, again, it's both. Like I've talked to my heroes about Dan Huff, and I've had like hours talks about this. It's like, on the one hand, if you play on enough stuff, like repeating yourself is going to be inevitable. So try to not lose too much sleep on it. Hopefully, it's in a small capacity, that you.
Because it's a strength too. I mean, if it sounds good.
Well, that's the double-edged sword, right? It's that thing of like, if you. And this is probably a broader conversation, but I kind of always lumped like amazing musicians into one of two categories. And I think that there's who I call the stylists. And I think those are the people that do a thing that is so innately them that like no one else can really copy it. You may get close, but like I think, Brent Mason is one of those guys that like people imitate Brent all the time. I've done it, but like there is only one Brent Mason. Like his thing is his thing is his thing. I always thought JT was that way too. He just had a certain flair and a certain touch that was just his thing. And there's people like that in all kinds of Rob Hayejakis.
I was fixing to say,
man,
that had that.
What an iconic thing like that. You wanted Rob Hayejakis, you can only get Rob Hayejakis
because he had that thing that he did, and it's on Garth Brooks records, it's on Brooks and Dunn records. But he had his own unique thing,
right?
Like it or hate it.
And then the flip side of that is like people that maybe fall into the more of the chameleon line, and I think that was never an intentional space for me, but I think that's where I landed because I just loved so many different kinds of music. And when I was trying to break in as a guitar player, all those guys you said earlier, I'd go buy these records and I'd be like, who played on this? Kenny Greenberg, Tom Bukovac, Brent Mason, Brent Rowan, JT Cornfloss, Jeff King. There's 101 guys. And, I just was absorbing all of those guys' parts so much as a way to be able to like, well, I want to work in this genre. These are the guitar sounds on records. This is what I need to be able to do. And I think I absorbed enough of all of those dudes, my favorite parts of all those guys, that I just kind of ended up in this spot where it was like, okay, well, if it's chicken picking telly, that I'm here to do that today. And if it's, atmospheric pop, if you want U2 guitar sounds, whatever, that's what I'm here to do that day. And then that became super valuable when I started getting booked on sessions with two guitar players. Like I remember like Julian, one of the first guys hiring me, he would hire me and it'd be like me and Troy Lancaster or me and Brent or whatever. And I felt like I had a good enough beat on what they do because I was such a fan that I would just do the opposites. I'd be like, well, yeah, Brent's here. I'm not even going to pick up a telly today. I'm going to play like Les Paul stuff and I'm going to do, whatever. And again, not that Brent can't, but I'm like, I know what he does better than anybody else. So I'm just going to steer clear of that, And so that was, I think that probably inadvertently helped me avoid some of those pitfalls because I was just kind of shape-shifting my way through all these records, there was some, again, like my guitar playing on this, Post Malone record versus what I play on Hardy records couldn't be further apart. And, I'm just lucky that stuff was all in my brain and enough people asked me to do both sides of that.
How much does it change your mindset picking up a different guitar?
It changes everything for me. And that's
drastic from going from a Telly to a Les Paul or even to a Strat.
And same thing with amps and stuff. And that's something I've always done. Like I take great pride in the fact that like I try to cast myself on people's records. Like I try to say like, I remember whether it's Blake or whether it was like Chris Young or Maren Morris or whoever, like I kind of at the onset kind of, you know, I listen to the songs and I kind of will pick, I'll be like, you know what? This is the guy in her band. Like he's going to play this Fender Tweed Deluxe and he's going to play this amp and I'm going to kind of try to use these 3 guitars for a lot of it. And I mean, I'll break my own rules sometimes, but you know, that was another way of just me kind of being like, I'm not going to be the same person on 10 people's records. Like I'm going to limit myself. I'm going to use these pedals and I'm going to try to do this and I'm going to try to think of it this way. I'm not going to play slide at all on this person's record. You know, if they asked me to, that's one thing, but I'm not going to offer it. I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to just, it's
This
like
car, did
character.
you bring everything?
Everything.
When you come.
I
That
got it
way you
all
got
there.
everything at your fingertips, no matter what changes or if they throw a new song at you, whatever.
All that. Yeah. And so like I said, I mean, I'll break my own rules, or there's been times when I've walked in thinking I was going to be one character and then it changes. But that was just something that seemed to make sense to me at the time. Like, well, of course I'm not going to play the same thing on a Blake Shelton record as I would a Maren Morris record. They're just way different people.
Yeah.
So like that seemed kind of obvious to me. And I just kind of doubled down on that. I mean, I still do that to this day.
How much live stuff are you doing and do you Jones for it?
Funny. Great question. You know, man, I had not played a gig in years. And then Hardy got me out a couple times a couple years ago. His like guitar player was getting married and I went out and did a few shows with him and that was pretty fun. They were opening for Wallin. Got to feel like an old man rock star for a little bit. And then this stuff with Post Malone, man, you know, we started making a record and then a year ago he took the studio band out to play Stagecoach. And then that kind of turned into, well, hey, would Derek help put, you know, he wants to go do a full country tour. Would Derek help put a band together, a Nashville country band out? Because they needed fiddle and steel and the whole thing based on the record. And I did that and, you know, through that kind of had the opportunity to go and kind of hop on a few of the shows and man, it scratched an itch I don't think I had realized I had in there. And I was lucky. We got to go do some cool shows. I mean, we played in Brazil for like 100,000 people in December and did a show in Mexico and did some cool New Year's Eve things and, you know, did some TV stuff. And so it was really fun and I had a good time doing it. That being said, I've kind of got them out now. They're out on tour and, you know, helped them build the new Coachella set and the tour stuff and did a bunch of the arrangements. And I'm like, that itch was scratched. I'm kind of happy to be back in my chair now, back under the.
That road life's a little
headphones.
grinding. No matter how you travel, it still will wear you down.
Even at the top, you know, thing. And like I said, I mean, I got my kids now, and I am at my core, I'm a creature of habit.
Yeah.
And if that was all I had going on, it would have been a great, like, I could lock in and that'd be blast. And when I'm out there, I'm out there. And when I'm home, whatever. But all the stuff I'm working on here in town, it's just, I felt like I was, you know, spread really thin, like kind of putting myself in two places. And I'm like, well, I got to be in town. I got records and publishing company and, you know, everything else going on here that I got to stay involved with.
Do you listen to much music as far as other artists and things, searching for production things, sounds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very intentional for me. I you know, largely I try to do discovery. You know, I always listen to like New Music Friday. I go, you know, on Apple and try to listen to stuff in a few genres.
Yeah.
And then I try to stay cognizant of, you know, going back and listening to Stevie Wonder records, you know, Fleetwood Mac records, you know, stuff, you know, or old Merle Haggard record, but like older records, you know, pre the 80s or 80s and
Pre-Pro Tools, way pre-Pro Tools.
Yeah, tape records, I call them. Because that stuff is so, again, secular that like it, you know, I mean, people reference Fleetwood Mac to me all the time. People
they were
reference
just good records.
Yeah, so that stuff's important for me to keep in there. And then, you know, I will say the thing I listen to the about the least probably is any kind of top 40, whether that's country or what, you know, I flip through it enough to know the players.
Yeah.
To know, you know, I can be in a conversation and of course I'm going to know Lainey Wilson or Dylan Marlowe or Cameron Marlowe or, but, John Party, whoever, but, I listen to that the least because I just feel like if you're chasing the radio, you're 2 years behind.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be really influenced by stuff that's on country radio right now because I know from my own experience, like a number one that I'm on this week, I played on that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
18 months ago, at best, maybe. That stuff, by the time we record it and then it goes up the charts and it's a long haul up the charts. I mean, some of that stuff's 3 years ago I played on it. They're like, did you play on this number one? I'm like, I think I did, but man, that was like years ago, So I'd listen to that just enough to kind of know the players, and then the rest of it, like filling my tank, filling my like creative sponge comes from like, new music, largely in other genres, or going back to the old.
Do you get nostalgic about analog at all? Do you want to go back? Have you ever done drums on analog and dumped down to Pro Tools and done any of that chasing around?
I've done all of that. I think if I'm honest, at this point, it feels like diminishing returns.
Well, nobody's really paying attention to it. Everybody's got headphones or earbuds stuck in their ears. Nobody's listening for the sonics of it anymore, and that's sad to me.
Well, it's just that, it's one of those things where it's like, to me, it's kind of all or nothing. And if you're in the middle, like to your point, it's like, I'm going to go make a record on tape for someone to hear it on their iTunes, like in their Bluetooth AirPods. It's like, well, that doesn't.
Because you're not getting the full spectrum.
I don't really know that matters, anyways. And it's a different skill set. I mean, that's the thing is like, there's plenty of, thriving studio musicians now that have never done a session to tape. And that's its whole own other conversation to have.
It's just so much more efficient now, but I do think we lost some. But the art of splicing tape back then, that's got to be that's a dying skill set.
Well, I'll tell you what we definitely have lost is, being forced into making choices. Because when it was all on tape, and the editing just wasn't, you couldn't go back and just change things, or, it's like, you had to make decisions. You had to make real decisions about your drum sounds and about the parts and who played what where, because you couldn't, go back later and be like, I decided I wanted to change the bass line, and it was like,
no.
So I will say, now sometimes we get into this, more is more mentality, and you just scatter some others, cover a track, and someone weeds through it later. Luckily, a lot of the people that I've worked for, and certainly my own philosophy is, again, try to treat the best of both worlds. Like, you've got that eject button if you really got to tweak something, if you get yourself into a bind, but I still try really hard to make decisions and decide who's going to do what right there in the moment. Because I love nothing more than tracking a session, something I'm producing, and I go back to my studio and I open it up and you go, hell yeah, already sounding pretty damn good. Now I just, do a little this and this. There's nothing more lonesome than going back and opening it up and it just sounds like 10, what's that thing, 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound sack? Yeah. It's like, well, shit, all right.
A lot of people don't realize too, and I got to experience some of this early on. When the music mill was still thriving, when Harold Shedd was still running all that, they had a little demo room called 805 over on 18th, and Butch Carr was there all the time. Yeah. We did a live record, we mixed that thing down, and we had no analog back then. This was like 02, and so we're all spread out over the console, and everybody's got their group of faders, and if you screw up, you got to start over. Totally. There was a skill set to that, man. Oh. And nowadays it's just so easy. If you want to sample something and fly it or bounce it over here, man, it's just so much more efficient.
Well, that's part gotten so easy. I would say the flip side, I talk about this, we could do 3 hours on just this, because I'm just such a geek about it all. But it's like, I was in this interesting spot where when I first started to get into some sessions, there were still some places doing tape. Bayou with Joe Spivey owned Bayou with George Clinton, and we were we were on tape there. Sound Emporium was still doing a ton of tape, and then a lot of people had Radar, which was this kind of in the middle section. Definitely wasn't Pro Tools. And I remember there being such an emphasis on getting the take when we did tape. I remember it was like getting the take where like the energy across the whole band felt right, like everyone's best performance. And then if you had to make a fix, you made a fix, but there was an emphasis on like getting the take.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, it's kind of like 9 times out of 10, once you feel good about your part, you move on and start doing your next thing, even if the drummer's still playing, because you know, you've at least talked about it. It's like, hey, are you playing that again on drums, Jerry? He's like, well, I'm going to play it again just because I want to do something different on the bridge. And it's like, okay, that's not really going to affect me. Cool. I'm going to move on to my thing. And again, the flip side is we are expected, because of the nature of music now, to have so many more parts on there. Drummers are standing up and playing tambourine, and they're doing shaker, and sometimes they're doing programming out there, and the keys and electric players are playing 3 or 4 stacks of instruments. The acoustic players playing acoustic and resonator and banjo, or, you know, whereas back then I remember getting the take and we would all stand up and walk away.
Yeah.
And go listen to the next song.
Unless you were doubling acoustic or layering it.
Yeah, maybe, like you said, maybe you had a guy switch to dobro. You might have had one person, or maybe the fiddle player stacked the thing. But it wasn't like everyone on the floor moves on to their next part. And so to me, it's like, again, not better, not worse, not harder or easier. They're just different.
Yeah.
It was like back then, you wanted to get a take with the least amount of fixes possible and like have this big arcing dynamic, because that was what was going to be the record. And now it's way more like, hey, we've all got our boxes to check here and we're going to move on. Like, I know you're an amazing drummer and you're going to get an amazing drum take even if I move on already. You know what I mean? And we all kind of think so it's just, man, it's so different. It's so different.
As a producer in this day and age where when you pull everything up on the grid and you've got a great track and everything is shoved all the way up the top, how do you create dynamics?
Yeah. I mean, that dude.
I mean, in my mind, the only way to do that is by adjusting volume. You move volume, you move things up and down, you build your gang licks in, but it's really, the bands don't breathe the way they used to.
It's the loudness wars, man. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. And I think that's a challenge, man. And I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think that's a battle I fight all the time.
Yeah.
And I think my own personal answer is that 9 times out of 10, it's just taking stuff out.
Yeah.
It's just going like, you know what? That was a cool thing he played or she played, but like, it's just not, you know.
You got to pull some things out to give it a spot to breathe.
Well, there's 2 quotes that come to mind. Julian King told me one time, he said, everything can't be louder than everything else. And I remember that just stuck in my brain.
Yeah. And
this Dan Huff had this philosophy of like, he would always say, talking about like, what's the meal of a track? You know, let's make a meal out of that, he would say. And it's like, okay. And by that, you know, if it's a guitar part, whether it's a bass, whatever, like that means like, hey, let's clear some space here, because that's the thing. Let's dig into this, and like that sound will be robust, and like we're going to give a lot of space to this because that's a meal. And then the other stuff is the side dishes. And so for me, it's been trying to get to that place where I'm like, hey guys, that thing that Brian Sutton's doing on acoustic, like that's the track, like that's the meal of it. And like, Jerry, what you're playing on drums is perfect. Like that's the thing. So like from you, I need some color here. And you know, keys, I don't even think you need to play anything till the chorus. Cause you know, and that's, again, speaking from my own perspective, that's the only way I know how to make the kind of dynamics that I appreciate, is just like people not playing sometimes. And
just
then
have them lay out.
Yeah. Lay out, you know,
or something.
Yeah. It's just, you know, save your spots here, you know, or like, hey, you're playing in the intro and the first verse and the chorus, and that part's awesome, but by the second verse, I just need a break. So why don't you just lay out?
Yeah.
And it's great if it comes back, but it's not the end of the world for your thing to go away for 8 bars or 16 bars. And that's, you know, and then picking your spots on what you double or what you stack to. But to your point, those records, and I hear them, especially in the pop world, the records that are like, it just seems like there's a million things going on, and yet somehow they still explode in the choruses. And like, man, I don't know how to make those records. I'll just say it straight out. Yeah. Like maybe it's all volume, maybe it's whatever. But I know for me, the kind that I respond to are the kind where like things continue to add and build interest, and you build dynamics by people not playing. I mean, that's plain and simple.
Yeah, it's. I think that's where we're at nowadays. What are your favorite vocal mics to use? I guess a lot of that's going to depend on your artist too and the character of their voices and stuff. You like those big, fat, warm mics?
I do. This is a conversation too about mic technique. I would say one of the bad habits that young singers have picked up is poor mic technique, because they have come up, not their fault, they've come up in writers' rooms singing vocals into SM7s and stuff that you like can't blow up, right?
Yeah.
And so they're used to just eating it and just singing right into it. And then you get them on a great old vintage condenser mic or something, and they'll blow it up. Because they just, you see them like lean in for big notes, and it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's the opposite. You back up. So, and then there's also certain, sometimes a thing does a thing, right? So back to the casting, I try to not get married on, I will say I have a great old vintage 269 that I feel like as it serves me well. I've never heard anybody sound bad on it, for sure. Yeah. It's good for just about anybody, but requires a little bit of vocal technique. I think 251s sound really great on a lot of girls. I think that's a great mic for female voices a lot of times. But then, I've put SM7s on records because sometimes it's a thing, it's a sound. And for me, it's always about like the singer, again, how dynamic is the vocal really? Like if it's a real static kind of like rapid fire, not a big dynamic range on the vocal performance to begin with, well then that 269 ain't really doing much more than what an SM7 would do. You know what I mean? And so, but if I've got a real arcing vocal, I've been lucky enough to work with this artist, Joy Williams, from the Civil Wars. And she writes for us over at Spirit, and I cut a lot of vocals on her for projects. And just an amazingly dynamic singer and an amazing vocal technique. And she can whisper into the mic and then step back for big. It sounds, Ronnie Dunn's another one. You watch that guy sing on a mic. When you hear it through the headphones, it sounds like it's been comped and compressed and tuned. It sounds perfect because his mic technique is so great, and he knows when to dig in and when to turn his head slightly. And that's decades of singing on high level mics and high level environments. And so, for those people, I ain't handing them a SM7. Absolutely not. But, if it's a kid and a high energy thing that it's like, well, I know what I'm going to do to this anyway, and it's going to have all kinds of slapback on it. It's going to be this. It's like, SM7, get after it.
How important is mastering now?
Cool.
By the time most records are done now, what really does mastering do to them?
Well, we're back to the loudness wars, right?
Yeah.
Because what people will tell you is that, like, if I'm doing a mix for an artist, one of mine, and I go, hey, here's a final unmastered mix, check this. Well, the first thing they're going to do is listen to it in their car or on their phone, and they're going to come back and go, it sounds great, but it sounds quiet compared to my, the other songs on my Spotify or whatever. Yeah. And you're like, well, it's because I'm trying to leave some room for mastering, and so then you end up making it louder to make them feel good about it. Okay, now the choruses are hitting the way I wanted it to. But then to your point, that leaves a mastering engineer almost no room to do anything.
And I've had a couple of things where everything sounded great until it went to mastering, and then we had maybe tuned the vocal a little bit hard in a certain spot on a real rangy spot on a chorus, and it gets that little warble to it, and by the time you hit mastering, then it's gone too far.
You're cooked. Cooked. And I think that just speaks more to like the problem of, because I think for me it's two conversations. If you do it right, I think mastering is the difference between a record sounding like $1 million and, $100,000, whatever. Like, I think when it's done right, if you get mixes at the proper level to a mastering engineer who gets the vision of it, I'm always really, really proud of the Scotty McCreery records that I do with Frank Rogers. Justin Ebank mixes those. We use Andrew Mendelson for mastering. Scotty doesn't get worried about how loud it sounds, so we get a great mix that we love. We leave room for Andrew to do his thing, and I'm always so proud of the way those records turn out.
That's awesome.
But I think, to your point, and more of the current state of affairs, is that so many people now hear a mix before it goes to master, because the artists want to hear it, their teams want to hear it, managers want to hear it, A&R people want to hear it before it goes to master. And yeah, if it doesn't like hit on their stereo the right way, they're going to come back and go, I don't know about this mix, and I don't know, because we're back to you're just comparing. It's not their fault. They're going, well, it doesn't hit as hard as this Miranda record. And it's like, well, it's not mastered yet. Like, well, is that gonna? But I mean, should the guitars be loud? They start, and so to me, it's just it's a consequence of the state of how we're making music these days, and how many people get to weigh in on these projects before they're actually done.
Did you do any work on Honeybee with Blake Shelton? Did you play on that record?
That was one record before my time.
God dang, that's one of the best records, best mixes of a record.
Dude.
It's so freaking solid.
I agree, man. And I mean, again, that Scott Hendricks, Justin mixed that record. I think Andrew mastered that record. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they've been consistently. I mean, that was the first time I worked for Scott Hendricks was on a Blake Shelton record. Yeah. And it was the record after that was the Bringing Back the Sunshine record. And I remember being like, this is it. So I remember getting that record back and hearing myself on that record and being like, it can't sound better than this. Yeah. Like, just such a, Scott's so detail oriented, and Justin's such an amazing mixer, and I mean, that's what I say. That's the stuff that I just think like, doesn't get better than that. You can get as good as, doesn't get better than that.
Are you a collector at all? Did you gathering guitars over the years, man? You play around with any of that?
I always say I'm an enthusiast. I mean, I have too many.
Joe Bonamassa. He's obsessed.
And I do. He's a great example. Like, whether I like watches too. I think when you call yourself a collector, to me, I think of like, you've got multiple iterations of the same thing. Here's this serial number, and here these three were made in the same years, this kind of thing. And that's like what Bonamassa is. I mean, he's got.
Is there really that big of a difference between a 58 Strat and a 85 Strat?
I mean,
I don't know.
For me, I've always just thought like, I always say, I'm a guitar player, not a guitar collector. And so, like, to me, if it's something that's inspiring to me and I can use it, then it's worth it. And I have some expensive old vintage instrument. I've got some stuff that, the business managers called me about after I bought it, but I've got $200 guitars that I used, I always say that the guitar I played on Maren Morris's My Church was a $200 Guiatone guitar.
No kidding.
That I played the slide solo on, played all the guitars, because I just got it the day before and I thought it was cool, and Busby sent me that track to play on, and that's what I did.
Who sets your stuff up?
I do my own.
Really?
Mm-hmm. If it gets down to frets, I'll take it to Joe Glazer.
Yeah, he's the go-to
But
guy.
I just learned early on to tweak my own necks, do my own intonation, all that kind of stuff. If it's frets or like filing the nut, I'll take it to Joe. But most of the time, I just do my own stuff.
Man, it's pretty amazing how far the gear has come to. We don't use them all the time. We went through a period just cleaning the stage up where guys were using Kempers instead of amps and stuff. There's some amazing sounds on those little boxes, man, especially when you're doing fly dates or gigging downtown where you can throw your Kemper in the guitar bag. And you don't have to carry an amp and all that other stuff.
I say it all the time, man. If I was touring today, like full-time touring, there's no way I'd have a real amp out
And
there.
it's amazing when you're using the Kemper, you can layer some Dano in on it. You can do the full spectrum.
It's
you can
crazy,
do presets in there. It's pretty amazing.
The technology has gotten,
I went and saw, let's see, it was Falling in Reverse and what was it? Disturbed.
Yeah.
Their whole deck was clean. That's all they had on the front. I don't think they were all Kempers.
I think they're fractals or something. Probably.
Yeah. There's so many of those now, like fractals or the Axe Effects or the neural DSP thing. That stuff's another one. I mean, I can't keep up now. And I tell people, so I get asked a lot, especially younger guitar players or touring. They're like, "What do you think about the fractals, or what do you think about the HX stomps or whatever?" And I'm like, "Man, I gotta be honest. I don't have much use for them. I'm sure they sound great. I'm just afforded the luxury of like, I go work in these studios and all my real stuff is there. So I haven't really had the need. I'm either working in my own studio and I've got a ton of shit there, or Cartage is hauling my stuff somewhere else. And so I just haven't had the need. If I was going to go out and do a big long tour, I'd do the deep dive and I'd check them all out and I'd learn how to do all the stuff. But where I'm at in my spot now, I have the luxury of having the real stuff. So again, that seems like the long way around. I'm going to go and program this thing to sound like my old Princeton reverb when I've got two of them right there. Like I'm just going to use those. They're right there. So.
Do you have any strange rituals before you play? I know when I was doing a lot of records with Brent Rowan would show up at least an hour before everybody, set himself in the middle of the room, turn his metronome on, and sit in there in the dark and run scales to a metronome, and just get it faster and faster.
Outlandish.
And freaking fast. I watched him do it every single time I ever did a session with him.
That's so funny.
You ever heard that?
I've never heard that story,
Yeah.
but that tracks. I love Brent. That tracks. I do get there early. That's just my own comfort. Like I don't like to feel rushed, so I like to get there, get myself a cup of coffee.
Favorite studio in town?
Blackbird D.
Oh yeah.
Just period. I mean, I would say Ocean Way A is a very, very, very close second. They're really different rooms, but Blackbird D, man, it's just the line of sight is great. It obviously sounds amazing. The gear locker is outrageous. The control room's a good size. That's it. It starts to get like a great engineer can make any room sound pretty damn good.
Yeah.
It gets to be like creature comforts for me. It's like I like places where I can see all the players, where I can see into the control room, where I got good line of sight. I hate it when you go into a control room and there's no place to sit down.
Yeah.
You're standing there, and like that, but there's like good places to eat in there. Like that's my favorite room. And then Ocean Way is a really close second.
Do you try to refrain from piecemealing stuff out, like during sessions and stuff? Because I've had to do it, and I don't really care. I like everybody in the same room. I like people tracking together, and I know there's people that are doing it different now, but I think you miss something by not having the creative input of that section being in one place at the same time. You're missing something. It's never the same.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that, and I've done both. I think to me, that's the producer's job of kind of knowing which situation is which.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I've had stuff come in where, an artist, did a demo with someone and it's a really good demo and they love a lot about that demo, but we need to recut it because maybe we just, at the end of the day, it needs to be in a different key or we just don't have access to those tracks or, whatever the case is. That's the kind of stuff I'll send out all day long because I know what it's supposed to be. And we're recreating what's there. I'm going to get great players to do it. I know they're going to put a couple little of their touches on it and that's going to be enough. And I know what it needs to be. But man, when you're trying to find what the song needs to be, that is when it's invaluable to me to be on the floor in those moments where you've got a work tape or they're telling you like, hey, I know this kind of sounds like a ballad, but I don't want it to be that. I really want it to have more energy or whatever. Those are those moments where everyone in the room at the same time, because oftentimes it's just one dude goes out to his chair and starts playing something and you're like, hey, that's the thing. Hey, he's on it. Like what Dave's playing on keys right now, and yeah, Jerry, what you started, that's the thing, man. And that's the stuff you definitely, you'd spend a week trying to do that all by yourself, pulling your hair out, trying to find what it is.
Can you imagine what it was like with those guys when the two guys that cut the Boston record? Oh, I mean, that was so far ahead of its freaking time back then. It fascinates me watching documentaries about that freaking record.
Well, and I don't know if you, the story I always heard too was like they did that and then they turned that in as like their demos.
And the label rejected it and made them go recut it, and they didn't recut it. They just remixed it.
Right. Yeah. And that was the thing was they were like, well, this will be great once you guys recut it. And they were like, what do you mean recut it? Like we have our lives on the, and then, of course, placebo. Like, it's like, now it sounds great.
Yeah.
Whatever.
How many times have we done that? Turn the vocal up, do this. The label sends it back, and you don't change anything. You send it back out. And, it's great now. It's happened over and over again.
Well, I have more of those stories.
And you can't talk about them. No.
I don't want to call anybody out. But, we had songs get turned in that, were... Even in the mix, I mean, that's the subjective part though too, man. I've had that stuff too where you turn in a final mix and they go, we're not hearing anything for the radio on this. And then one of those songs was a 6-week number one.
Oh yeah.
It's like, well, it happens. Everyone misses something.
How important is like what you say in the studio as a producer? I mean, you have to be aware that you're probably getting in everybody's head with whatever you might say, just offhand. I mean, is like, how do you pull out the greatest performance without squashing their creativity?
Well, I'll tell you this. My one trick I learned from a couple of my favorite producers is like never underestimate the kind of the one-on-one. And, you can get in trouble on that talkback because everyone hears it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are times when you go, there are moments where, you just need to pull everybody. Stuff I'm producing, in Nashville, we always, it's like 10 a.m. downbeat, it's like by 9:50, I have already pulled every musician on that floor to the side and just said a little something like, hey, so man, this first song, you'll hear it in there, but like, it's just kind of static from you. It doesn't need to have a lot of dynamic stuff. And it's, and the drums is just, but it's good. I know it's going to be awesome. Like you're going to have great sounds for it. So we go in there like, okay, cool. And then you go to the acoustic player and you go, hey man, this one, I'm really kind of going to lean on you. Like the lick thing there's kind of almost, but like, I think it can be better. Let's improve. I got an idea. Here's this thing. And by the time they've even heard that song, I've already kind of given them a lane or at least a little bit of direction. So they're listening to it with that perspective. And to me, that cuts down on the like sweeping, like everybody's wrong or everybody needs to change or we're way off base here kind of things. Or those moments when sometimes you don't want to single somebody out. You don't want to say like, hey man, the bass isn't doing what we want it to do. And you might say like, I'm not quite sure the groove is right. And drummer goes, well, I can change the kick pattern. You're like, no. Not talking to you, man. So that's why I say I just have always gotten way more down the field by just kind of pulling people aside. I'll oftentimes we'll listen to something and artists are in there and I hear what they have to say and I'll say something like, hey guys, this is going to be great. I got a couple little spots, get a coffee. I want to come talk to you. And I'll go out there and just one-on-one.
Yeah.
Well, you're basically as a producer, man, you're the coach, you're the cheerleader, man. Yeah. You control the dynamic of the whole room. You got to keep the energy level up. You got to keep people focused. Mm-hmm. And there's a skill set to it.
It's the whole thing. Cause you're trying to make the artists happy. And like we talked about some of the musicians, depending on their day, their own ego may be out there on display too. It happens to all of us,
Have you, and I've found myself guilty of this too, going back and listening to some records you did a few years ago and going, God, I could have done that so much better.
Oh, man.
You can never let it go completely, can you? I can't. I don't care how long it's been. I go back and listen to old records. It's like, God, I wish I could do that again.
I know, man.
It never ends.
With the benefit of hindsight. Well, that's I always say, like, for me, like, a record's never done. There's just when I have to turn it in.
Yeah.
It's like I work on that side. I obsess. Like I work on that stuff till there's never one time that I've worked on something and like turned it in 2 weeks early. Like Lindsay knows that. It's like tell me when you have to have it, and I'll have it there. But I'm gonna obsess over it until that has to be turned in. Like it's just the way you never get done doing
That's what makes a great producer, man.
Well, I mean, that's the only way I know how to, I know how to do it because I feel like it can always be better. And my thing too is it's like that stuff's exponential. If you make something 1%, you make this part of the song or this vocal or whatever, you make it 1% better. That's 1%. If you do that 10 times in a track, it's 10% better.
Yeah.
If I got that kick drum a little bit tighter in the mix, or if I carved out a little more space, or I decided to double this one little guitar part that made it speak a little bit more. I tweaked it. It's like, yeah, you do that 10 times, you've significantly changed the outcome of the sound of that record, in my opinion. So
how many times do you think you listen from top to bottom through every single record before you turn it in? 100? 50? If you're that obsessive about it, is there a number?
Well, I will say that the top to bottom thing, that's usually more like a 2 times thing, because I just want to feel good about sequencing or making sure that the intro of one track doesn't need to be turned up because after this song it sounds a little quiet, some of that stuff. which is also mastering. But the listen throughs on the individual track, hundreds. I mean, I just never, and because the way your ears work too, and then I go listen in the car and I listen on different references, and there's also a lot of science, like you listen differently when someone else is in the room.
Yeah.
I'll go pull people from my office. I'll have listened to a Casey Tyndall mix 10 times that morning. And I'll be like, Andy, come here and listen to this. And just with him in there, I'll hear something because it changes the way the human mind is a strange thing, man. And he won't even have to say anything. And I'll be like, that vocal was too loud in the chorus. And he'd be like, yeah, that was what I was going to say. I was like, the minute I heard it, I knew it was, you know.
Because you were standing there.
Yeah.
What are your favorite monitors to use in the studio? I mean, I used to love to listen to NS10Ms because they were a little harsher. And if you can make them sound good on NS10Ms, when they went to mastering, they were spectacular.
So I have these, the brand is called Barefoot. And I have this specific set of Barefoots that like, they have like basically different settings. And one of them is an NS10 setting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I also mix when I'm working in the studio. Like I listen really quiet. I'm a quiet listener. And so, yeah, to your point, if they sound good on NS10s, because those things are not forgiving.
No,
if
not at
they
all.
sound good on NS10s, they're going to sound great.
Dude, I
on
remember
everything else.
my first Star Coach that I had built, I had 4 NS10Ms mounted in the ceiling.
Oh my
and I
gosh.
had a Yamaha power amp, and you couldn't crank it up halfway without it ripping your freaking head off in the front lens of that bus. It was awesome.
100%. That's we call that client volume.
Oh boy.
You know, well, and that's the thing. And then sometimes, you know, I'll have artists in there or people or whatever, and you want to bump a little bit, and there's a setting for that too.
Yeah.
The
That
modern,
don't suck knob.
modern with the subs on and turn it up. Doesn't your record sound great? Loud as shit, you know?
Man, I could sit here and talk this stuff for hours,
Yeah.
just like you said earlier, but I sure have enjoyed the visit with you.
Oh, man,
It's
me
great
too,
getting to
man.
know you.
Yeah,
I
I
hope
didn't
we
expect to nerd out this much, honestly.
But
So
I
this is
freaking
great.
love it so much,
Yeah.
man. I hope we get a chance to work together somewhere down
I
the
would
road.
love it, man. I
I
would love
really would, man. Congratulations on all the success.
Thank
You're a
you.
good dude, man.
Thank you.
I appreciate your passion and skill set, man. It's
Dude,
freaking
you're
awesome.
a hero and a legend. Like I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for people like you. So
Awesome. Derek Wills.
yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys.